back to Inside the Box. I'm Joanna Lee, and we are celebrating the first Asian Heritage Month with one of LA Times and Magazine's top 6 picks artists. Known for the art of Kathak, our guest today is the founding artist and artistic director of Leela Institute of Kathak. She has toured internationally and earned honorary and recognition for her artistry. She is a disciple of Kathak legend Pandit Chitresh Das. Please welcome Canadian musician and Kathak dancer, Seibi Lee. Welcome, Seibi. It's wonderful to have you here with us today.
Namaskar. It is wonderful to be with you too, Joanna.
Thank you. And I would love to start off with you sharing your origin story and your journey of becoming the artist you are today.
Thank you. It's a bit of a long and convoluted story, so um, I I'm going to add some detail because I want um, people to know that sometimes the path to your sort of heart's bliss is not necessarily perfectly straight, and sometimes you take a little side path, but in each of the paths that you take you learn a little bit, and oftentimes what you're learning on the side paths help bring you to the path that you really want to be on for your life. um, so music and dance have been a really important part of my life from a very young age. I think I might have been a bit energetic and rambunctious as a child. So at age 5, my mother put me in piano, violin, and ballet classes. And I immediately loved ballet the most. However, I was given the choice that if I quit one of those things, I had to quit them all.
Oh,
So
wow.
as a result, I kept up the violin until I was in grade 9. I actually really love the violin. The violin, as you know, is a, you have so much control over the sound that you're making. You have control over the pitch, and you have control over the bowing. So all of the aspects are very dependent on your focus. So if you're not too focused, then sometimes everything goes awry. So I think because it took a lot of work to be a good violinist, that was one of the things that I realized that maybe I would need to let go. So when I was in grade 9, I let the violin go. And in grade 10, I was lucky enough to be accepted into a pre professional dance program at Alberta Ballet. And this meant dancing 3 hours every day after school, 5 days a week. And was so happy. I really wanted to be a ballerina, but I've got a kind of sturdier constitution and I'm a bit big boned. So I really had to kind of let go of that idea as a something that I would do for the rest of my life. But that year of intense dancing really was one of the joyful times of my life. And I kept up with the piano through end of high school, and I completed my grade 10 at the Royal Conservatory examinations. Um, but when I entered university, I decided, because my whole family, my parents are retired physicians. My father, a surgeon and family physician, and my mother, a gynecologist. And my brother at that time was also studying medicine. So there was a little bit of a pressure. So I thought, okay, I will follow the family path and go into sciences with the intent of going into, I was in pre med. But in the third year of my science degree, I actually discovered the harp. And this is also a little bit of an interesting side story. Why the harp? My mother actually had wanted me to play the harp when I was a child. But when she went to look for a harp teacher in Edmonton, there wasn't one, and the nearest harp teacher was in Calgary. So she wasn't going to drive me to Calgary for a harp lesson. So I ended up in piano and violin. Um, But when I discovered the harp, it was like the best combination of the piano and the violin. The piano, you hit a key, the key hits a the hammer hits a string. It's a bit far, and with the harp, you rest it against your shoulder. You feel the vibrations like the violin, and you're plucking with your flesh and bones. So it's really a lot, very tactile. I think that sort of envelopment around an instrument was very wonderful for me. And I will also say that I was a bit temperamental at the time, and I found that with the piano and violin, you can get out a lot of anger and make some terrible noises and some really loud sounds on the piano. But when you sit down to the harp, you can pull really hard and you get a little twang, but it's not very satisfying. So I actually found that the instrument itself made me sort of deal a little bit with that temperamentalness, and made me sort of really sort of sit back and think about the music outside of my own sort of angst-ridden emotions. Um, and I was really happy to find that instrument. And although I ended up completing my science degree, I then ended up going into music at the University of Alberta, studying with Nora Bumanis, who is the Edmonton Symphony principal harpist. And I studied there for a couple of years, and then ended up going to the University of Toronto to study with her teacher, Judy Lohman. And she, for many years, the principal harpist of the Toronto Symphony. And there I did finish my bachelor's. And then, of course, the way that my life goes, between my bachelor's and my master's, I went to a concert at the music hall, and it was Kathak, which I'd never seen before. And the Kathak dancer was a former student of my teacher, Pandit Chitresh Das. And so I saw the dance form, and I was really fascinated by the speed, the power, the nuance, the gracefulness, the storytelling. All of it was really, really, really exciting. And I thought, I just got to try this. And luckily for me, Joanna D'Souza, who is the Kathak teacher in Toronto, she was sitting behind me in the concert. So she actually told me, I'm not teaching during the summer because this was a summer show, but I'm bringing my teacher in the fall for an intensive workshop. So call me then. And I did that. And I called her, and I did a 5-day workshop. And my mind was completely and utterly blown. I found that because of the way that the beat cycle goes in North Indian classical music, that it's almost like kind of sophisticated mathematics. It's like little mathematical equations that you're working out with compositions, which was really fascinating to me. And then I was like, oh, okay, so the things that I learned in my science degree, I actually apply here. And there's a lot of really beautiful sort of spirituality and philosophy that goes with the dance, which was very appealing to me. And just the sort of physicality of the dance form was absolutely amazing. So I ended up studying with Joanna for a few years, and then I also completed a master's degree in harp at the same time. So I was juggling both of those in Toronto. And then I had the opportunity to move to Vancouver, where I really was concentrating on the harp. I was playing with the Vancouver Island Symphony. I was teaching a lot of students, very enjoyable, but there was no Kathak in Vancouver at that time. And so I decided that I had one more move in me to start over again, because when you're a freelance musician, you have to take time to build your reputation and do all of that. So I was like, okay, I'll do it one more time. I will make the move to go to California because I really want to study the dance. I can't leave that behind. It's really a missing part of my life. So I was in Vancouver for 3 years, and then 3 or 4 years, and then I came in 1997 to California and started to study directly with Pandit Chitresh Das, and also to be a harpist here in the Bay Area. And so that's sort of how I was introduced and got to the world of Kathak. I did do harp for about 25 years. I taught at the university, and I also taught privately, and I did a lot of freelance orchestral work and chamber music, and I only gave that up about 7 years ago to kind of fully concentrate on dance, which I don't regret. I did harp, but the thing about the harp, which I love, I still love so much. Unlike the piano, where if there's a piano in the room, you can sit down and play it. When I sit down to play the harp, it's quite painful because I've lost all my calluses, and you really need to be practicing a couple of hours a day to keep those calluses going. But I did give um, the the harp a really full time in my life, and so I was okay to sort of put it aside to concentrate on the dance.
Wow, you had quite the journey. You went from one coast to the other, and now you're back in, the, I would call it the best coast. Yeah. So, can you tell us more about the history of Katak?
Yeah, it's so Kathak. The word Kathak comes from the word katha, which means story, and the kataka is a storyteller. So the art form really has its roots from thousands of years ago. It was a form of worship in Hindu temples, and also an art for dancers to carry and present the stories of the time and to villages, and to take them from one village to the next. So those things have been in the art form for thousands of years. And starting in the early 16th century, the Mughal rulers in India, in the northern part of India, this dance form comes from the northern part of India. There are 8 classical dance forms, and Kathak is one of them. And the Mughal rulers were great patrons of Kathak, and the dance form flourished in the courtly environment. And the influence of both the sort of spiritual aspects and the cultural aspects of the Hindu temples and the aesthetics of the Persian and Mughal cultures is actually one of the really unique and beautiful aspects of the dance. So it has 4 aspects that the dancer must be able to be well versed in. Okay, you can't miss any of these aspects. So one of them is called tayari, and this means readiness. So that's good technique, strength, stamina, and also like the readiness to kind of do whatever needs to happen when you need to do it. So there's that. There's laikari, which is rhythmic acuity, but it's not just to dance on the beat. It means that you are so deeply in tune with the rhythm that eventually you can improvise. So improvisation is a very important part of it. Third is khubsurti, which is gracefulness, so the gracefulness with which you move your body, and then nazakat, which is the delicacy of that graceful beauty, which means the movement of the neck and the eyebrows, wrists, the way you breathe, all of these sort of subtleties. So the dancer has to be really like well rounded in all of those aspects. And then on top of that, there is abhinaya, which is expressive dance. So sometimes we have poems that we recite that have pure dance and expression, and then we also have the dramatic aspect of storytelling. So you have to do everything.
Sounds intense.
It is. It's really fascinating, and that's what's really great about the art form is that at no one comes to the art form with all of these skills fully developed. So at some point in time, you're going to be very, very challenged. And sometimes the challenge is exhilarating, and sometimes the challenge is very difficult, and causes a lot of introspection, and sometimes causes dancers to think that they don't really want to keep going down this path. A lot of us have power, but then we don't feel graceful. But in this dance form, you have to be both, or we're very happy to play female characters, but we don't want to play male characters, and you have to play all the characters, including animals, deer, all of that sort of thing. So, all of these things challenge us, challenge the way we look at the world, the rhythmic acuity. Some of us like to sort of dance a little bit in a fog naturally with our body, which you can do up to a certain point, but because there's a lot of calculations on the rhythmic cycle, you have to have some awareness of all of that too. So these are always really interesting things that come up for each of the dancers as they go through their journey of learning.
Well, that's quite the ordeal. Yeah, so speaking of which, I would love to hear the origin story of the Leela Dance Collective.
Um, yeah, so when my teacher was alive, we danced in the Chitresh Das Dance Company, and that was his company, and it was very focused on his works as well as should have been. He was a phenomenal master artist, and we were very single-mindedly devoted to that vision and that learning of that vision. He passed away early in 2015. And at that time, it was a bit of a struggle to understand sort of how to negotiate the transition from us all being very devoted to following him and us continuing his legacy. And a number of us felt very strongly that the Chitresh Das Dance Company really honored him and his work, and we wanted that to remain very pure, um, in that honoring and respect. And but we understood that the art form has to move. The art form is living, so it has to evolve. And how do we find the way to express ourselves, without coming in conflict with what we understood was his vision? So we we a number of us got together who were like very much on the same page philosophically about how to carry forward and continue his legacy. And a year after he passed, we got together, kind of on the anniversary of his death, to talk about what it is, and how we would go forward. And he had actually said to us before he had passed that he felt that, you know, us working together would be sort of much more powerful than each of us individually sort of just reinventing the same wheel over and over again. And we really took that to heart, and we thought, well, how do we sort of honor that and figure out how to give us support to create? And so we thought, instead of going down the model of the single artistic director and the company following the single artistic direction, that maybe what would be better is to actually create a collective. And so that it's with the thought of collective creativity. Now, what is collective creativity? We also did not want to put boundaries on collective creativity, right? It's like everybody doesn't have to be involved in everything. And sometimes, like, people make jokes that, like, if everybody's in a democracy and it's all democratic, everybody's just arguing with you. There has to be some amount of leading a little bit here and there. So how we've thought about the collective is that it's a space, a safe space and supportive space for each of us as especially the senior artists, to create and express ourselves. So we come to the collective with an idea or a proposal or a thought for a new project. And it may involve one person. It may be a solo. The last thing that I did was a solo series of solo performances. It can be duet, quartet. It can be full out dance drama, which we have done too. And depending on what the project is, then it may speak more or less to the artistic directors, and then we involve ourselves sort of accordingly. And some of us will kind of step aside and let the others lead, but we will still, like, if our voice is needed, we put it in there. And then the collective is not, even though I keep speaking of the seniors are leading, but we do give space for our junior dancers and our ensemble dancers to also have a voice in the things that we do. So I will give a little example. We created a full-length dance drama called Son of the Wind, and that actually involves 25 dancers. So it's a really big project, and it is a story of a section of Hanuman's adventures, and he's a tribal prince, and he's helping Ram rescue his wife Sita, who's been abducted. So it's a really epic story. That's why you have lots of characters in it. But we were doing a war scene, and so we wanted to do, we were using sort of sticks, and we wanted to have a kind of like warlike dance. And it happens to be that one of our dancers also studied martial arts when she was young. And so she had actually done some sort of martial arts with not the stick that we were using, but stick-like objects. So she actually showed us some of those moves, and we found out how to sort of incorporate them in the dance itself. So when we're doing it, we're not like suddenly becoming martial artists. We're just evoking some of those movements through the dance that is really visibly Kathak. So we thrive on those kinds of opportunities and communications to let also our dancers express some of their thoughts.
Sounds like you give a lot of liberty to the group members, so that's really nice, and it does sound like you have somewhat of a democracy going. So speaking of the main group members, I was wondering who they are and what their designated roles are.
Sure. So I will tell you that we had 5 original co-founders. Myself, Reena Mehta, Rachna Nevas, Sarah Morelli, and Shafali Jain. And out of those 5, 3 of us are the main artistic directors, and that's myself, Reena, and Rachna. And we don't, again, as I mentioned, it's not one of us that always leads, and we collaborate with each other. So last week, I think, Rachna and Reena were in North Carolina doing Speak, and this is the phenomenal collaboration with 2 tap dancers, Michelle Dorrance and Durmisha Sumbri Edwards. And so it's 2 Kathak dancers, 2 tap dancers. So the stage has the Hindustani music on one end and the jazz musicians on the other end, and then the dancers going back and forth and collaborating, and then the musicians collaborate. So it's really amazing because tap and Kathak rhythmically have an amazing connection. And then there's an exuberance and a beautiful sort of kind of co-creation that happens between the four dancers and the musicians, and it's really, really wonderful. I just did The Voice Within, which is a solo project that I did in San Francisco, LA, and Edmonton, Alberta. And we also have the dance drama that I spoke about, Son of the Wind, which was premiered in Sonoma. And then we've done it in San Francisco, in LA, and Philadelphia, and actually we took it to India and danced at the Royal Opera House in Mumbai there. So that's been really, really exciting. And then we did during COVID a really, really fun pop up series for which Rena was the lead of that, called Resound. And we actually got sort of 4x4 boards, that travel boards that we opened up and danced on in the streets because no one could be indoors. And it was really an amazing opportunity for some of our junior and upcoming dancers to get out there and to do performances in the public. That was really fun.
Well, you sound very busy, and it sounds like you've been doing quite a lot of projects. And speaking of collaboration, how does the group decide on who to collaborate with?
I would say that for my solo, for instance, this was a very personal journey, and I really wanted to honor the really strong influences in my life. One being my dance teacher, um, and my mother and my father. So it meant that when I went to look for the musicians that I would be collaborating with, I was also thinking about the best expression of those aspects of it. Um, for something like Speak, I mean, I'm not in Speak, but I will just say that because tap dancers use jazz musicians, then it was really important to include what what they what is like their truest part of their dance, and then for the Kathak dancers to include their truest part of their dance, and for that to come together. So um, jazz musicians and our musicians, so that's how that sort of got decided. For Son of the Wind, which is a big dance drama, we it was I ended up doing a very intense storyboard to figure out what it was, that the narrative that I wanted to present, and then together with Rachna and Rena, we brought our musicians, and then we worked on developing the music, and then we then developed the choreography, and then we brought all of them back together again because our main musicians are in India, so we can't actually rehearse with them on a daily basis. So we do a lot of development before we see them. So, for instance, for my solo, my first performance was on Thursday, March 31st, and they arrived in San Francisco on Friday, the Friday before. And so my first music rehearsal was Saturday, and then my first dance rehearsal was Monday with them. Um, but because we worked together, we sort of understand, and I had some conversations about what I wanted to present, so we were able to pull it all together um, during that time.
Well, that sounds like it's quite a lot of organization, and you have to be really on top of things.
It is. There is a lot of organization and administration, unfortunately, that goes with with making beautiful music and dance happen.
Absolutely. So I was also wondering, who decides on the program repertoire and the compositions?
I would say that definitely the artistic directors, whoever is leading and involved at that time, is very instrumental in deciding that. Um, we we all have a certain sort of, you know, areas that we are really strong in, and this is why collaboration is really wonderful. So, for instance, in Son of the Wind, um, we worked in a number of different beat cycles, and each of us have more or less experience in those beat cycles. So sometimes it sparks some inspiration, and one of the artistic directors will think about this composition or that composition. Usually it's those, like, deciding on compositions are not necessarily coming from junior dancers because they're still in the learning process, and the compositions have to make sense in the context of what it is that's happening. So we may like a certain composition and want to put it in, but if in when we're figuring out the dance it doesn't fit, then we may have to kind of shift to something else. So it's a pretty organic process. I find for myself, the way my brain works, I like to, kind of in my mind do a little bit of storyboarding or preparation or composition. So oftentimes I will make a lot of different compositions and I will try them all, and some of them I'll find really immediately are work well and I keep them, and some of them work well for one performance, and then the next, in a year if I'm doing a similar performance, I may be in a different headspace and that composition doesn't resonate with me anymore. So I might create a new one, or I might find, another one that I had done previously that I want to show again in a different way. And for us, the composition is really the syllables that we speak, and the rhythm. So that is the sort of common language between the musicians and us. It also means that that expression of that composition can be anything, like not anything. I mean, it has to go with the feeling of the rhythm, but there's just a myriad way for expressing those things. So, for instance, um, we have a composition called a paran, which uses syllables that are both in the tabla and a bigger drum called the pakawaj. And in sort of when you're learning it at the beginning, we do it in like a single and double speed. So it's da, da, ke, tunga, da, ge, din, or da, ge, tunga, da, ge, din. So it's single double. And then I was doing a rhythmic cycle of 15 beats, and for some reason the straight presentation, which we usually do in 16 beats, was not sort of feeling quite right. So I ended up doing something that was a little bit more, it feels a little jazzier for me. So it came out da, da, ke tunga, da, ge, din, ge, da, da, din, da, de, da, kita, da. So it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, like, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, however you want to think of it. So it's the same syllables, but it's shifting in the rhythm. So then it's expressed in a different way when you go to do it.
Sounds like, your classical training has really helped you in, identifying the rhythm and the beats. And it's really interesting because every ethnic music background has, different prototypes of rhythm, I would say. And
Yeah.
it sounds like this one's very specific to Kathak. And speaking of which, how do you come up with the choreography and what's your inspiration behind it?
You know, compositions are often they are handed down from generation to generation, and again, the syllables and the rhythm are handed down, but the actual way of dancing them is can shift over time. Um, and other compositions are created, and you have to have an artistic sensibility and a nuance that sort of makes the set of syllables work into a long lasting composition. Okay, so we have both of those things going on. After doing, for me, after doing a particular composition many times, it sort of sinks into my body and my psyche. And if I have a set of sort of working movements that I have, so oftentimes we will learn a composition and there will be like a class work sort of um, strength and stamina, and it's doing technique, it's and footwork technique and body technique, so we're expressing the composition that way. And then we might do a more fluid choreography version of that composition, so oftentimes we are learning like a straighter version and then a more choreographic version in the classroom. So if I'm doing, for instance, the straighter composition over and over and over again, like that rhythm, the syllables, the movement, that it all just sort of sinks in, and then at some point in time it sort of moves into a more instinctual place, and I find myself doing sometimes more complex movements or more simplified movements that feel more resonant to the way that my particular body moves. When I'm choreographing for others, I have to think about how the movement suits the narrative, if there's a narrative, or suits the context of the composition within a larger choreography. So there's that to consider. And then there's also the consideration of the particular dancer that you're working with. So sometimes what will happen is a dancer happens to be like a little bit more graceful um, than others, and you're working with that particular one to get the choreography. So you might add some of those movements because they're coming back to you in a way that you like. And then you might set that choreography for the group and everybody has to learn that particular one. Or you have working with like a really powerful footwork dancer and it's inspiring you to pull out more of those rhythmic aspects. And then you would let everybody learn that choreography also. So different dancers will pull out different kinds of movements sometimes in the moment.
Wow, that's that's a lot of detail. And so I was wondering, as one of the artistic directors and educators of Kathak, can you elaborate more on these roles?
Well, interestingly enough, one of the things when I was learning the dance from from my Guruji, he felt for each and every one of us, especially at the senior level, we had to learn how to teach. And not that he thought all of us were going to be teachers, but he felt that when you are learning how to teach, all the things that you take for granted as a student get kind of thrown in your face because the students don't do that, and you're wondering why don't they do the thing I'm showing, and it's like, okay, it's actually my fault because I'm the teacher fault or whatever. It's my responsibility to help them sort of and bring it out of them. So how am I going to bring it out of them? So it makes me understand, okay, that person over there doesn't understand my vocal cue, but actually needs me to come closer and actually like move their body or show them the movement. Or that student over there has a very mathematical mind and doesn't understand when I'm saying, be graceful, but they will understand me speaking more in mathematical terms. So I have to change and shift, and I have to learn how to get into everybody's head so that I will actually bring the best out of them, right? Because as a teacher, you must see the highest potential in each and every student. And then your job is to get your student to that highest potential. It's not my job to judge the student. So, I can't, when I look at a beginner class, I can't say, oh, that person is uncoordinated, they'll never be a dancer, or that person's, because it actually never turns out to be true. The dance form is so hard and complicated that the person that looked uncoordinated but has like a real passion and drive sticks with it year after year, and then year like 7 to 10 just blossoms into this beautiful dancer, whereas the person who was sort of naturally graceful never learns how to practice and just goes on, just sort of floats by on their sort of beginning talent, but then never develops into something. So each and everybody has a beautiful potential that needs to get reached. So when you start to have that relationship with the dance, then when you are yourself are in class, then you're like, oh my gosh, like really I'm just sucking up the energy of my teacher, and I really need to give back that energy to it. So it makes you try harder, makes you really express more, really makes you appreciate your teacher in a much greater way. So I have to really thank my teacher for making us go through this process. In that process, it turned out to be that I happen to have a great passion for teaching. So I'm really happy to be mentoring and teaching students, and the joy that I receive from being a dancer is something that I want others to be able to feel. So that is really a big part of that. And then as a sort of artistic director and working in collaboration with my Guru sisters, like that is it's like a marriage. You can't take it for granted. You must work on it day to day. It's a relationship you're building, and the strength that you can build together is really a beautiful thing. So it's very worthwhile. And Leela, the Dance Collective is the model for the professional company, but the idea of collaboration and bringing together is also the whole thought process of the organization. So we have 4 sister schools that work together. We have Leela SF, of which I'm a big part of. Leela LA, Rena Mehta is the head of Leela LA. We have Leela in Denver, so Sarah Morelli is the lead of that. And then in New York, Rachna Navas is the lead of Leela New York. So, we also are working to build that and to be collaborative about that. During COVID, it was actually a big impetus for us to bring the schools together, because we were all online, and we were all online doing, like, again, reinventing the wheel 4 times. And we're like, well, really, this is the one time in ever the world universe that this is ever going to happen, we hope. So we actually brought all of our students together and then divided them very particularly by age and by ability, so that they could be with their peers across the country. And some of them were from around the world too at that time, right? So that meant that oftentimes in my class, if I don't have enough students to have like a very separate preteen class, then my 12-year-olds will dance in a class with adults. So, but in this case, online, we had like all the 12 to 14 dancing together. So they bonded and saw each other and were with their peers in that context. And then since we've now gone in person, we also do partly now in person, and we do online classes. That relationship has continued for a lot of these students. So then you don't feel like you're isolated in your own little place in one city, in a small place. You actually have connection to the outside world. So we're really, really happy that has been an inadvertent sort of consequence of the COVID situation, but it's really brought us together in a really amazing way.
Well, that's, it's wonderful that you have all these other networks within the States, and hopefully you guys can come to Canada more often now that the pandemic is, on its last legs, hopefully. Fingers
Yes.
crossed.
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely.
So as an educator and a performer, what measures can we take in especially sustaining the arts?
I think that one of the things that we always have to kind of start our day with is that arts are a labor of love. And I think that being in a situation, the COVID situation, where we could not do live performance, um, I think we all started to understand, both as artists and as the community that enjoys the art, that the difference between seeing something online and in person is very different, and that I think that leading up to the COVID situation, I think that people were really sort of, again, it's something to take for granted. Oh, it's out there, but I can see it on. I could see a video of it. I could see it's okay. It's just as good. Listening to the DVD is as good as going to the symphony. Over time, it's gotten a little bit more like this, and I think that during this time, I think people have realized that actually that connection and and it happening live in front of you is a different experience. It's not like bad good, like it's not that kind of judgment, but it is a it is a different quality for which all of us need to experience. Okay, we all can't go to a concert every day. I understand that, but don't like go for like 2 years and not go to a concert. Like your life actually will be better if you go to see a live performance. Um, so I think that really sort of keeping that in the forefront is an important thing for us to strive for, because I think we're all like trying to negotiate. Okay, it's more popular, you need to be on YouTube, then like I can reach more people on YouTube, then I can in a concert hall, live streaming, all that kind of stuff. I actually chose this last concert, this last series of solo performances, not to live stream, and part of the reason is that it was a very very personal show, and although I would have really liked to share it with more people, I did feel that it was really important for people to experience it with me in the theater. So I think that making those choices, so that it's not all live stream, it's not all not live stream, but that there are like conscious decisions that we're making, I think that that's important. The other thing that I think that I was really happy to realize is that I felt that the government agencies on the whole were really conscious of how hard the artists were being hit by this, because of not being able to be out there and do live performances. And so I would say that the granting agencies, and the offering of sort of loans that didn't you didn't have to pay back the whole thing, all of that kind of stuff, especially geared towards artists, was really important. And what I hope happens is that everybody realizes that it actually isn't just during COVID that we need like support, that it's not easy to be an artist, and that that kind of recognition and support, if it's ongoing, will really help the arts thrive.
Absolutely. You hit it right on the nail. And yes, artists, you really need support. So thank you for sharing that with us. I was also wondering, as a role model to female artists and women in the Kathak community, based on your experience, what advice would you give them?
I'm not sure about giving advice, but I have some thoughts. Um, I think that I think that in every field there are going to be barriers and people who do not want you to succeed. And when you find the art form that resonates with your innermost self, it's going to be a very vulnerable place and yet a very powerful place to express yourself from. Um, it's also a way to connect with a place beyond your ego, and it reaches to an energy that's sort of like beyond our physical selves. And I think that this connection is both freeing and grounding, and it's also an inspiration that makes the struggle of everyday life, which during which you're faced with people's criticism, difficult finances, injuries to your body, repetitive strain, all of that kind of stuff, it makes that all worthwhile. So I would say that, sort of broadly, that's really my thoughts with regards to um, sort of finding your art form and being okay with your art form. I will have to say, like, my long story about how I got to Kathak. I mean, part of that is a struggle to meet society's expectations of what I should be. Familial, parental expectations, and I I want to honor my parents. They brought me into this world, right? But I also have to understand that they brought me into this world, I hope, um, to to be a good person, and I think a happy person is a good person. Like I don't think being miserable helps you be a good person. So I hope that even though I do an art form that seems a bit of a mystery to them, that I'm not doing Chinese dance or Japanese dance, and that might be more understandable to them. I hope that they see that I'm a good person and I'm doing good things, and that I'm happy doing what it is that I do.
And speaking of performances, I was wondering what was the most memorable performance?
I was lucky enough to be included on a tour with my Guruji to India, and at that time he was doing a collaboration with a tap dancer, Jason Samuel Smith, called India Jazz Suites, from which the speak collaboration that I spoke about, that my Guru sisters do, that was inspired by India Jazz Suites. But so the India Jazz Suites was my teacher, and then this young tap dancer, and we were the company, the Chitresh Das Dance Company. Some of us were included to go with him on the tour, and we were doing a piece which is called Kathak Yoga. This is a technique that my teacher really developed in his lifetime, and he wanted to sort of have the dancer understand that you are not always going to have musicians to sort of bolster what it is that you're doing. You actually also have to be a musician yourself. So he worked on usually what happens is when we're dancing, the musicians are keeping the beat cycle, one with rhythm, one with melody, and then we are dancing on top of the beat cycle. So when we do Kathak Yoga, we actually sing the melody and we recite the beat cycle as we're doing it. So we're actually being the musician and the dancer at the same time. So we were doing a Kathak Yoga piece on his program, and we toured. I think we did like 4 or 5 cities in India. We were in Kolkata, we were in Pune, we were in, a number of places. And for me to be able to watch him perform over and over and to see how things changed in each performance for him helped me sort of understand how that co-creation happens between the musicians and the dancers and him and the tap dancer, like how structured and yet how fluid the art form was, and how at that level, that mastery level, how amazing it was. And then I got to actually see all of these different cities and see the reaction to these these things, which were quite new to that audience at that time. So that was a really, I think, one of my more memorable tours.
I was also wondering, what are your proudest accomplishments?
I would say that probably Um, teaching is a very proud accomplishment for me, to be able to sort of bring dancers. Now at this point in my life, I've got dancers who started when they were 4.5 years old, and now they're like in their sort of mid late 20s. So I'm seeing generations keep the dance going for, a really great part of their life. Um, and I will have to say that this last set of performances, The Voice Within, this has been particularly just, it's been hard because it is a sort of coming out of COVID, and I think that's why it's such a personal show. On the show, I am specifically wanted to do a 15 beat cycle, which is sort of in honor of my Guruji, who gave me this beat cycle just before he passed. And he didn't actually teach um, the sort of, usually when you're learning a beat cycle, you're given a lot of compositions and you learn for a number of years. He didn't have that opportunity. He only gave us the, like, and gave particularly me. He wanted me to really sort of take this on as like a bij mantra, which is like a seed mantra. So something that resonates really deeply in my body and expresses itself out in a very personal way. So I've been developing that since he's passed, but I worked in a different way during the isolation in COVID, and then being in isolation and not being able to visit my parents in Edmonton was really quite heartbreaking to me, because just before COVID hit, we were about to celebrate my father's 90th birthday and my mother's 88th birthday, and we had to cancel that. And then we had to cancel the next one. And so this year we were like, we have to make it happen. And so we were celebrating my father's 92nd birthday and my mother's 90th birthday. And so I have never performed in Edmonton. I've never done a live performance with live music in Edmonton. I've done short recorded pieces. So I wanted to do a full performance, full solo performance. And I wanted to do a Chinese story for my father and a Japanese story for my mother. And these, even though they're not stories from the Indian culture, which is normally what we express, they're very much in Kathak style. So I'm not changing it up. I'm really mostly wanting to show that the art form is big enough to be able to express stories from other cultures, and so being able to just create the show, to do it in the place that I'm living, which is the Bay Area, to do it in LA, where my sister has her school there, and then my guru sister, and then to actually finish it by coming home and doing it for my parents the day before their birthday celebration was like really sort of very significant for me, because I don't know that I'll have many other opportunities, them being so elderly. And then I also wanted to figure out how to give back to the community that has been a big part of their lives. And my mother was one of the founding members of the Annborough Music Foundation. And my father has worked many years with the Chinese multi-level care foundation, and they're building a senior residence. Like, they've actually broken ground and they're building a senior residence in Edmonton. So these are huge things that each of them have been working on. So we did it as a benefit concert for those two nonprofits, and so far we've made over $20,000 for not each, but for both of those nonprofits. And I'm really happy that I was able to sort of give energy into that, and also to be celebrating it around their birthdays, and it just all came together in a really amazing way.
That's quite the accomplishment. And yes, I would say that's absolutely something to be really proud of. And that's really special. It really resonates very close to my heart. So thank you for sharing that. Speaking of which, are there any other upcoming projects or concerts coming up for the group?
We're working on quite a few things. I don't want to give anything away with regards to upcoming new projects, but definitely we are working on touring of Speak, and we may bring back touring of Son of the Wind. It's just so many dancers, and we're still sort of in this not 100% out of COVID. I think that one's going to be a little bit more down the line. And then each of the senior artists are also really working hard on doing more solo works. So those are also happening sort of continuously as we go forward. And we definitely have some new projects that we're working on that will hopefully come up in the next year or two.
That's still, quite a lot of things to plan for. So I wish you all the best with that.
Thank you.
I'm sure it will be wonderful. I know this is a very tough question, and I don't mean to bring anything negative to our lovely conversation, but I was wondering, with the political climate and the awareness of systemic racism, especially towards people of BIPOC today, what are your thoughts, and how can we bring in cultural diversity and openness to society in a very positive manner, especially during Asian Heritage Month and, well, post-pandemic?
Yeah, that's a really important question. One of the things that I think about is that sort of all histories are written from the eye of the beholder. And there's nobody that is perfect. None of us are perfect. Each of us has our beautiful qualities, and each of us has flaws. And no matter how much good we do in the world, there's always going to be things that we could have done differently. And I think each of us has to do our best to keep doing better in what we do and what we say. And how do we do better? I think a big part of it is listening. I think we have to listen to other people's stories. And when I say stories, like, it's not stories made up. It's actually like people's stories are their truths. And each person's truth is different. Even if you're growing up in the same family, your whole vision of what your experience was with your parents and with your surroundings can be completely and utterly different. And if you go to a movie, sometimes even with your friends, you go to the movie and you come out and you're like, did you see the same movie that I saw? I mean, the thing is, but that's important because they're seeing it from their point of view, and their point of view has to do with their experiences in their lives. And we don't listen. we just want to give our opinion, and sort of like our opinion is like the right opinion because that's my experience. Well, I think the listening process is not happening. I feel, especially when listen to politicians, they're not like one person speaking, one person listening, and then responding. It's this person speaking, and they're just, the words are basically crashing into each other. And I feel that sort of respect and honoring people's, um, stories and truths is a big part of what is not happening and what we should just really, really strive to do. And then I know that I'm always learning, and so as I learn, then I must then act accordingly, which is with more knowledge and wisdom and better. Um, and for me, in what it is that I do, I think collaboration is the way that I am trying to address and speak to, like, address when it's like speak to what is happening, and speak to how that sort of listening and that sort of communication can happen. So I'm not, I'm not saying that people have to sort of like, the idea of melting pot doesn't really make much sense, right? I don't want to melt into somebody else. I want to be me, and I want you to be you, but I also want us to be able to coexist in the same place. So I think, for instance, like my trying to reach out across, like, to a different culture, to my Japanese and my Chinese heritage, and to bring those stories so that I can share those stories with other South Asians who are seeing their art form, and they're looking at their art form. They're like, oh, my art form can express other people's art forms. And when my parents or their community see it, they're like, oh, we're seeing our Chinese culture, but somebody else is recognizing the culture, right? So these are all really, really beautiful things. And I think that, um, again, I'm not trying to do Japanese dance. I'm not trying to do Chinese dance. I'm evoking my Chinese heritage, and I'm evoking my Japanese heritage within the context of the respect and honoring of the tradition that I am doing, which is Kathak. I and collaborating, my Guru sisters collaborating with the tap dancers and the jazz musicians in the same way, showing those art forms at their highest and in their pure forms, and showing how those art forms speak to each other. Like, as artists, I think that's a really great way of sort of, um, working it through our day-to-day lives.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. It's very important that you integrate your art and your heritage and your culture and your personal experiences as well as your personality. And I absolutely resonate with that. And what a brilliant way to actually integrate your two heritage and put it into, an art form that you've been working on for, I would say, most of your life, right?
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. So my final question for you would be, how would you personally celebrate Asian Heritage Month this year?
I would say that one of my celebrations is actually speaking with you. I think that, again, speaking, and saying your stories and sharing your stories is really important. And you are asking people to share. So that's a really amazing and beautiful thing that you are doing. Really, now that I'm coming back, I would say that my performance was basically like an offering to Asian Heritage Month. I feel like now is a time, a bit of reflection to for me, to understand like the effects that it has had on me and has had on my community, my parents' community, the dance community, um, and to continue on that line of making collaborative efforts. So, for instance, one of the organizations that I work with, very closely here in the Bay is the Oakland Asian Cultural Center. Really, really wonderful organization. And they have, over the years, started to have sort of different festival type um, times where they're bringing in um, different Asian, South Asian, Pacific Asian Islander, like all of the cultures to kind of show different things. So the most recent thing that they have added during COVID was the celebration of South Asian New Year, which is in April. And so our youth company danced with that, and that's really nice because Oakland Asian Cultural Center used to be very focused on sort of um, it's in Chinatown, so it was very focused on the Chinese community, which was really beautiful. But what I love is that it sort of like opened its arms to sort of the greater community, and to bring awareness of all these different times of the year. And then they're also doing Asian Heritage Month. Last year we performed, the Leela Dance Collective performed on their online show for that. So I think that just keeping all of those um, collaborations and really supporting organizations that see the bigger picture is kind of the way that I'm going to continue thinking about Asian American Heritage Month.
That's a great way to celebrate, especially since, this is the time to do it.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you so much, Seibi, for sharing your time, your story, and your talents. It was an absolute privilege. And to our viewers, we are incredibly grateful for your support. There will be an exciting performance of Kathak after, and you will not want to miss the opportunity to watch Seibi perform. So please enjoy. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit that notification. In the meantime, be well and keep on supporting wonderful artists like Seibi. See you next time. Bye.
Kathak, an Indian classical system, is very heavily on improvisation and mind and mathematics. So she's taking chances and they're taking chances because there's not really any rehearsals with them. And I don't know what she's going to dance, really speaking. Every time she called me, I said, please leave me alone. So that's almost all my seniors, they are trained like that. So this is big hand, please, for all of them.
one of the most blessed women to be the mother of Krishna. But it was also troublesome. He was a little bit of a naughty boy. One day, she is working very hard, and she is spending the whole day churning butter. And she's churning and churning. And then she has a little taste herself. And it's very good, but she knows if I leave it here, my young child is going to come and steal some of it, so I will be smart. I'm going to take the butter and put it in a small jug. And I'm going to take this rope, tie it around, and I'm going to throw it over a big stick there and pull it up very high and tie it up. I know he can't get it then. Then she goes to take an afternoon nap. In the meantime, her little one sees what has been happening, and he has convinced his friend to come with them rather reluctantly. So he grabs the hand of one, grabs the hand of the other, drags them in, and he says, "We're gonna get that." He says to his smaller friend, "You jump up, you try." So the little friend goes, and he goes, and he jumps. But it's not gonna happen. So then he says, "You, tall friend, you've got nice long legs, long arms, you can get it, I'm sure." So tall friend comes and jumps really high. Oh. Still nothing. What are we going to do? They say to Krishna. And Krishna says, I've been playing by the river Jamuna all morning long, and I've been carefully picking stones and putting them in my pocket for just such an occasion. So he takes one of these stones out, and he aims, and he throws. And the pot smashes on the ground and breaks in 1,000 pieces. His friends are terrified. They hear that his mother has woken up from the sound. So they, like good friends do, run. Krishna doesn't hear any of this, and he sits down and he is enjoying this butter. So good, so good. And then he sees a shadow cross up in the corner, and then he feels his ear being pulled. So then he looks and he sees his mother's angry face. And what does Krishna do? But he produces the biggest, fattest tear. And his mother, who has him by the ear and is ready to punish him, her heart melts. She cannot punish her child. And she dries his tear and she says, "I will feed you butter, my child."
Jai Krishna Jai Prabhu Nityananda.